Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today is very special. This is the third presentation that we are doing. Yesterday I did a presentation on Jung's four functions and how you can use the tetrahedral model in order to think about Jung's functions. So today what I'm going to do is that I'm going to build on it. What I realized is that it established the foundations, but we need to build on that. And how do we need to build on that? Because Jung talked about 8 functions. We talked only about the intuition, thinking, feeling, and sensing, and we did not talk about the introverted and extroverted versions of them. I want to bring that in. If you have not watched the video, please, there is in the link below, there is a video linked to that. Second, what I'm going to try today is to apply these tetrahedrons to the 8-function model that John Beebe has, which combines 2 great ideas of Carl Jung, that of cognitive functions and archetypes. I'm delighted to have my friends Rohit and Rupali here. And they are not familiar at all with Jungian functions. So this is my attempt to describe it to them, and then they will have questions and we will take the questions. I would also recommend that you watch Richard Owens' presentation on John Beebe's 8-function model, which is, I think, the best thing that I have seen on thinking about Jungian functions. And again, Richard Owens did the presentation on 52 Living Ideas, and John Beebe himself was there. Richard Owens is a student of John Beebe, and it's an excellent presentation on John Beebe's model. So again, it is down there. Please watch that. All right, so what I'm going to do now is, firstly, I'm going to quickly recap what we are doing here. The aim of using the tetrahedron is to emphasize the integrity of the self. That this is, we have a fourfold self, and these are all parts of us. Though we may focus on 1 or 2 of them more than others, all the other ones are there, part of us. They're part of people around us, and appreciation of all the functions and how they interact with one another to support our life is very useful. So it's bringing all the 4 functions together is what is the primary use of this model. Quickly recapping, we've got 4 functions, Jungian functions. There is the sensing function. Now, the sensing function, I'm going to talk briefly about the 2 versions, 2 orientations of each of the function. One is introverted and one is extroverted. So extroverted sensing is about acting in the world. This is my own understanding of each of these functions. This is about moving in the world. This is physical action in the world, taking in information, acting. An athlete is a very good example who has very high level of extroverted sensing, ability to move. The introverted version of it is you take in all the memories that you have. It's about memory. It is about cataloging of all the concretes that you have learned and have it available to you in a very powerful way in your mind. So that is extroverted sensing and introverted sensing, and we are using green for that. The next is feeling. When you read Jung's description of feeling, really he means valuing. And again, there is introverted valuing and extroverted valuing. The introverted feeling or introverted valuing is about having strong personal values and your commitment to your own personal values, your full devotion to it, your full emotion into your personal values. So that is introverted feeling. Extroverted feeling or extroverted valuing is doing that with people. It is empathy. It is you're caring about the people. You're being extremely aware of the social emotion of the group that you are in, and you're valuing of that. So that is the feeling functions in the introverted and extroverted. This is thinking, that is blue. I think of thinking as organization. So extroverted thinking is about organizing the world. It is about planning. It is saying what people are you going to work with, across what time, where, how does it need to be sequenced, how does it need to interact, how do they need to interact with one another, how do you integrate all of that out there. That is extroverted thinking. Introverted thinking is that applied to your own thoughts. It is about being logical. It is about getting rid of any contradictions. It is about bringing things together. So it is doing that process on your own knowledge. That is introverted thinking and extroverted thinking. That is the blue. This is intuition. Intuition, extroverted intuition is curiosity. It is exploration. It is about exploring possibilities. It is about saying, what is it about the world, and trying to see the possibilities. That's what extroverted intuition is about. Introverted intuition is about vision. It is trying to say, what is the meaning of it? Bringing together everything, all these insights. Now, the way I understand these functions, these are like breathing in and breathing out. The extroverted intuition goes out, trying to look at the world, seeing more and more and more and more possibilities. And introverted intuition brings everything together into a single vision, single integrated vision. And there is this breathing in and breathing out that is going on continuously. So they actually play very well with each other. But while you're doing one, you are actually not paying attention to the other, but you have to cycle back and use it. It's really going to be powerful. Your exploration is going to be powerful if you keep on seeing the meaning of what you're doing, so it guides your exploration. Similarly, the vision that you have is going to be powerful if it is fed by an enormous amount of exploration. So similarly for thinking, there is this kind of both like a tension between this. This is like brother functions, like they work very well together. Similarly for this one, so the dynamics of these two functions are actually, of internal and extroverted versions of these functions, are very interesting. All right, so that's a very quick overview of all these functions. This is mostly repeating and recapping what was said in a much larger video that we did. Now I want to jump into something far more complex, because I want to see, Rupali was asking me a question, so how are you going to use this? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start using it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a particular type. So let me put this off the stage here. I'm going to take a particular type. The type I'm starting with is an intuitive type, guided by thinking. The next function is feeling, and next function is sensing. Okay, now this is where genius of John Beebe comes in, because he brings two of the great ideas of Carl Jung together, that of archetypes and that of cognitive functions. So let's look at this particular type. I'm going to describe this model in terms of a single type. For people who are familiar with MBTI, this is ENTP. The first function is extroverted intuition. Okay, the second function is introverted thinking. The third function is extroverted feeling, and the last function here is SI, or introverted sensing. Now, the way in which, so I'm going to put it here, okay. Again, for this tetrahedral model, it visually shows you the importance of it. You read it from left to right like this. This is the dominant function, which is 9 times as big as your last function, fourth function. So it's nine triangles here. Okay, so this is the dominant function. What does the dominant function mean? In terms of archetypes, John Beebe calls it the hero function. So this is the driving function. This is the car. If you look at the car, this is the driver. This is what you're driving with. In this particular type, it is extroverted intuition. What does that mean? That you're trying to explore the world. You're tremendously curious and you're trying to explore the world. You're trying to explore possibilities of what can be. That's what this function is about. And what does it mean for something to be a dominant function? It means that you are very strong at it, you use it effectively, you enjoy using it. When you use it, you get energized instead of being drained. These are the various ways of looking at the function. So that is a dominant function. The second function, to use the car analogy, is the navigation function, is the navigator sitting right next to you. He's your guide. In terminology of John Beebe, it is the father function. It is the parent function who's guiding the hero. This particular exploration is being guided by thinking, introverted thinking. So all the material that is coming in from the exploration of possibilities is being compared to each other. Logical, you're doing these logical references, you're collecting all the data, you're parsing it, you're saying, if this is true, what would it mean? So there is a lot of thinking that is taking place, introverted thinking, to guide it. So that's the second function, which is the father function. Now the third function, Beebe calls it the child function. So this is the hero function, that is your go-to function, main function. This is the elder function, the father function, which is giving you the guidance for it. This is the child function. You love this function. It is not fully developed, but you love it. And you want to engage in it. But it is not as strong as your dominant function, yet you like it very much. What typically happens is that people start out their life by focusing on these functions. Later in life, they develop these last two functions. So this is the function, the child function, that you have delight in developing further. So in this case, it is FE. That is the empathy for others, trying to maintain comity in a group, focusing on common values. All of that is here, FE, that is extroverted feeling. And the last function here is introverted sensing. Now there is a natural tension between these. So you can look at these two as two kids in the back of the car. They are not really driving anything, but they're making very nice sounds. This especially this one is making nice sounds. You like having the kid back there, okay? Though they are not driving, but it adds to the enjoyment of life, okay? And this is the anima function. This actually is something that really grounds the function, because what happens in these possibilities, that you're continuously going out and looking for things, looking out for possibilities. This is keeping track of everything in the past, the concretes. So in some, there is a very interesting dynamic between this. So Beebe calls it the anima function or the animus function. So those are the four functions. So now you will ask, These are the 4 functions, but Jung has 8 functions. Okay, so what about the 8 functions? So here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to create this one right here. I'm going to put it back here. Okay, so this is your right hand, assuming that you're right-handed here. So this is, and it's in the front, and this is your left hand, which is at the back. Okay, this entire complex, this entire set of things, Beebe calls the shadow. So this, in the Jungian terminology, that this is the shadow of this. These functions are there up front. In Gestalt, you would call it, this is the figure, this is the ground. This is the background of the functions. These are conscious, these are less conscious. This is what you focus on, and these are there kind of coming along for the ride that you're not really focused on. So this is how I would use the tetrahedral model to think about all 8 functions. So now let's look at these functions here. Any function here should be understood with reference to the corresponding function in your main first 4 functions. So let's go one by one. Again, this is I'm quickly going through this. Again, I encourage you to look at Richard Owens' presentation. John Beebe came himself and he presented his model as well on 52 Living Ideas. So I'm going to link to that as well in the comments there. So please look at that for a much more detailed presentation of how this model works. What I'm trying to do here is to provide a visual way and a tactile way of thinking about that model, the 8 function model. So first point is that any function here in the shadow part has to be understood with reference to the function here. So this is your hero function. Now I use slightly different terminology than Beebe does. So this is your hero function. This function here, Beebe calls the opposing function, and I call it the brother function. So it's like, for me, like NE is like going out and NI is coming in. So for me, it is like breathing in and breathing out. So it is like, there is a tussle between them. You know, it's like brother saying, no, I want to go out. The other brother saying, no, I want to come in. So there is a tussle. But both have to work together for them to do anything. There is a lot of affinity between them, but there is a lot of tension between them. So this is like a brother function or opposing brother. There is a friendly rivalry between these 2 functions. So that is the 5th function. Now this function over here, the 2nd function, is the father function. This function, Beebe calls the syntax function. It's like the parent who is criticizing you all the time. This is the parent who is supportive. He's saying, you're doing the right thing, do it this way, do it this way. Whereas this parent is a synax. He's basically just criticizing you. So what are you doing? You know, going ahead in exploration. This is the TE corresponding to this one. So here it would be, coming back to the first function, this is any, so extroverted intuition, this would be introverted intuition. So the opposing function is going to try to come up with a vision behind all the exploration that is going on. Okay, this function here, TI, is busily organizing things internally, and it works very well with the opposing function. This function is about planning things in the world. It is saying, wait a minute, you're going out doing all of this, but what about how are you going to get this work done? How are you going to make money? How are you going to do this? So it is all focused on applying that exploration to the problem of living, and that is felt by this hero as being a critical parent. So that is the feeling of this function. And I'm describing you only one of the types, one of the 16 types. And you can do the same kind of analysis for each of the 16 types. And what the details of each of them is different, but this dynamic between this being a supportive parent and this being a critiquing parent remains the same. The dynamic this between this being the hero function, go-to function, and this being an opposing function to that, that dynamic remains the same. Let's go to the third function. The third function here is a child that you delight in. The third function here is a trickster. It's a very mischievous child. Will get you in all kinds of trouble all the time. Okay, so for example, for this, it is the extroverted emotion, which is what you're most comfortable with, but your own feelings are something that you always, that gives you trouble. Okay, so it's trickster. That's a beautiful way of putting the nature of this function. The last function here is the anima, one that completes you. And this function here, Beebe calls the demon, the function that gets you into the maximum amount of trouble. So these are and these last two are very difficult to understand, and I'm not very good at explaining all of that to you. So I would, I would refer you to Carl Jung, who spends a lot of time discussing anima, or to John Beebe or many other Jungian psychologists who spend a lot of time with these. But you can see that it is like a family. Okay, this is a family that is working together very well. This is like the dysfunctional part of the family, and all of that is happening within you. The beautiful thing about this, having the 8 functions and mapping that into a family, is that we are able to think about things better by personalizing it. That's what the whole idea of the Greek gods is about. That you personalize something like courage, you personalize something like intelligence. And this is the same kind of thing that is being done here. You're using the archetypes which we can understand. For example, you understand a relationship between a hero and a father, or the hero and the child. And you're using that in order to understand what is going on within you. So that is a quick overview. I know this is a lot of material, so Rupali and Rohit, any questions? We can go with the questions. Go ahead.
So I think this was very helpful to understand the 4 introverted and extroverted. I almost thought it was like Louis Sullivan taking things from making it your own and then creating something of your own with the information that you go in. I'm curious, about how to understand your own type with knowing now what these 4 are and what the subsets are, the orientation is. Because I like the way you said this is a functioning family and a dysfunctioning family, and it's all happening within you. We are not perfect. And so, how do you raise your own awareness of who you are, and then, identifying your 8? How do you do that?
Okay, it's a great question. It is, look. I mean, I think that ultimately, you yourself have to know. You yourself know yourself much better. So a lot of it is just introspection. What this does, what I like about these functions, is that they give you like measuring tapes, and you can understand what like extroverted thinking is, or introverted intuition is, and you can ask yourself to what extent you do that. So you, just by having these concepts and understanding the concepts and trying to place yourself, it increases your self-awareness. That's one thing. Second thing, there are all kinds of tests out there. I particularly like the test of keys to cognition.com. They give you the strengths of each of these 8 functions, which I find to be much more useful than a simple straightforward MBTI test, which try to put you in a particular category. I think it is much more useful to understand the strengths of all the functions. I also want to tell you that all the testing is very limited. There, it varies from time to time. The accuracy, your ability to understand the question is a variable. So I do not, I don't recommend relying solely on any tests. So I would start with the tests. I would start with understanding the functions that look strong to you. And then I have a resource which I really like, and which is the videos by Michael Pierce on different personality types. So what I would do is that I would identify the functions and look at the possible combinations for you. Don't say that you are something right away. You go ahead and then watch all the possible people, possible personalities that you may be, using Michael Pierce's videos. Michael Pierce does this holistic presentation of each of the types. These videos are about 15 minutes each. I'm going to link to the playlist in the chat. And you compare yourself. You say, for example, you're saying, okay, I get that I'm an INTJ, but I could be an INTP, I could be an ENTJ, I could be ENTP, something like that. So I would go ahead and watch all the 4 videos and then make detailed notes of saying, is this like me or is this not like me? And try to formulate that. And then, don't jump. So the other thing I would say is that you have capability of developing functions. One of the core ideas of Carl Jung is that of the self and the process of individuation. Process of individuation is development of functions which are weaker here and weaker here. So none of this is set in stone. This is like a snapshot of you right now. But knowing your strengths and weaknesses enables you to deal with your life better. Knowing your weaknesses helps you deal with your life better because you can base on it. So it's a complex process. And I'm very, very conservative in terms of saying anybody is this, because it is a process of discovery. So you have to go through all of this process and study things yourself in order to get there. That's the best answer I have.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, and you said this partly in what you mentioned, that it is not set in stone, because I was going to say, we are constantly on a journey to improve ourselves. And what I like about the tetrahedron is that it is a shape that's pointing upwards, and you are trying to become as integrated as possible. And so by knowing yourself in that snapshot, what are the changes that you should do, or how can you help yourself be more integrated? What would you recommend, or what do you suggest in using this model?
How to be more integrated? I would say that, look, in 52 Living Ideas, we have looked at works that were produced at other times, like Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, and Gospel of John. These are done during scribal times where the integration of all these functions is far more powerful than what exists today in people in modern times or in thoughts of modern times. So this kind of integration, if you want to really learn about what that is, the strongest, it's a very odd answer, is that you should go and commune with that kind of work, which is what we have done in 52 Living Ideas. That's why I'm coming at these functions in a very different way, because by just having these tetrahedrons, right, I'm saying that we can't lose the sense of oneness. You can't lose the self. Even when you're focusing on this, you know that there is all of this stuff behind. Even when you're focusing on these 3, you know that there is a ground of this behind. And you can't really forget that. And if when you extend it to the 8 function model, you cannot forget that when you're looking at your first 4 functions, there are these functions at the back that are working and that are actually shaping what you're doing. So I would say, so that's one thing, communing with. The other thing is to have the attitude of kind of namaste towards other people, where you're trying to genuinely try to understand other people. Because what you will find is that other people have different functions. They are better at different things. They are actually better at using some functions than you. And we have a confirmation bias tendency of just seeing what we are good at and focusing only on what we know. This is all about saying, what is the ground, and using that as a basis. So those are the 2 big things that I would say: being genuinely open to people and looking at works which have a much greater tradition of integration and holistic way of looking at things, like the Indian tradition or the Chinese tradition, or the tradition of, let's say, the like Gospel of John we are studying. It's all integration. Integration is built into everything. So whenever anything is being said, the connection of that to action is right there. The emotional impact of that is right there. The vision, the intuition guiding it is right there, in all in one. And that is the best examples that I've seen of the integration. Rohit, what about you? Do you have any
Yeah, I
questions?
wanted to ask the shadow function, the strength's going to be the same as the.
No, they're going to be much lower. They're going to be much
No,
lower.
but the intuition in this case, is the intuition also going to be the strongest of the shadow functions?
That's a very good question.
Okay.
I mean, I know that for me it certainly is. Like, there is, but there is variations. There is variations. Typically, for the first function, this the 5th function tends to be very strong. So, like for me, like NE and NI, both of them are very, very strong. The 2nd function maybe, 3rd function not. So there is tremendous variation between people.
Right.
But that's an excellent question. In general, all the functions here are stronger than functions here. That's point number 1. The function, the higher up the function, the stronger it is over here too. Just like so that's kind of a general. But underneath that, there is a lot of variation.
Yeah. And one of the things, when I first saw this tetrahedron, and when we were mapping people, right, I was under the impression that the smallest triangle probably is the weakest area for that person. But when I look at what John Beebe is saying, is that animus, or the anima function, you can develop it, and you're not stuck with it, you're not bound by it. And what you mentioned, it's that those are the childlike functions in the back seat, making it enjoyable. Can you tell a little bit about that? Because the dominant function is very easy to understand. How do those the child and the anima functions, how do they shape you? Well, what is happening
Okay,
there?
so that is a very tough question, actually, because like a lot of Jungian psychology is about that, and it is what he calls it depth psychology, where you're trying to get things which are implicit, that are there in the ground, that are there in the unconscious. One way to understand, the way I understand anima, is something that completes you, that you needed it, but you didn't know it, you needed it explicitly, and it kind of completes you. So as a whole, you're much stronger. It shows up very dramatically in interaction with people. We were talking about business partners who kind of complement each other, or teams, where members of the team complement each other, that you cover all the bases together, and that is the area where it is there. So many times you yourself may not be good at it, but if you realize that you need that, then you can work with people, and by working with people over time, you develop the strength yourself. One of the beautiful things that Ray Dalio brought up is that he says, there are 4 different ways of dealing with weaknesses. And this very much applies there. He says most people, their favorite way of dealing with weaknesses is to ignore it and to evade it. Okay. And if you do that, the weaknesses don't go away and they will keep hurting you all your life. And you have no power to do anything about it. So the next step is when you say that, okay, I have a weakness. And then you can do 3 things about it. One is that you can work with people who are strong at it. And for me, that is the simplest way of doing that. That is a fundamental way, I think, of doing that, because we are social beings and we can't be good at everything. Part of it is that your strengths and weaknesses are connected at the hip. The fact that you're strong at something, you can't be focused on that at the same time as focused on something which requires exactly opposite kind of a focus. So that working with others is the second way. The third way is that you can work on it explicitly. And I would argue that the best way of working on it is to work with people, others, because what happens is when you're weak at something, you don't even know how weak you are. Like you might think, okay, I have become twice as good, but you might move from 1% to 2%, and you have no scale whatsoever to evaluate it. But if you're working with somebody with whom you have some common things, so that there is a common base of values. Many times it is like a function that is in common. Like we looked at the example yesterday where two business partners had the intuition in common. Though their first function was thinking, one of them was thinking, one of them was feeling, their intuition function was common, which was the direct, navigating function. So there was a tremendous amount of trust between them. So then they could use the dominant function of one person and the anima function of another person in order to work together to fix each other's weaknesses, together being much stronger than otherwise. So that's the third part. The fourth part is you can come up with ways of working around your weaknesses. This is also a great way. Like you're working with other people and you say, okay, you know what, I'll improve by 20%, maybe 30%, but still I'm going to be weak. Yeah. Rest of it, I will work around it by going to them for those things, and we'll make sure that the trade is fair. So that's what I would say.
So basically, work with other people.
Work with other people.
Work with other people, yeah. So I think what it is identifying weaknesses and then recognizing. It's the Namaste idea that recognizing other people have strengths, and we are so focused on identifying the weaknesses of others. In school we've been given grades and not for just the strengths, but the focus is where you're weak. But if you nurture the strengths and then say, okay, I have acknowledging it, I think that makes a big difference in then saying working with others is possible.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, on that, I would recommend the book Moats and Beams. The quote that, you can see, you can't see the beam in your eye when you notice a moat in somebody else's eye. This is a book by Michael Pierce. I recommend it very highly. Again, we've done a couple of videos. Michael Pierce was good enough to come and do an overview of his book. I will also put the links to that in chat, and I would recommend the book as a really good introduction, excellent introduction to this entire field. What I want to do now is I want to give you another example. I want to walk you through another type, which is a different type. What we're going to do, we've done, this is NT type. We're going to do NF, or let's do NF type here. So we've got this one right here. So we're going to have F as the first function, and let's do it this way. Okay. So now we're going to do the same thing for this type. Okay. And I'm going to try an introverted type. Okay. So and then more questions. You can, because it's good to work through at least 2 examples to see the patterns, that it's not just one type. You can do this for all types. So I'm doing it for just two types here. I've chosen here, it is, just a second. What did I do? Yeah, that's right. So this one is Fi and Ne. Okay, so this is INFP. So you got feeling. So these are a typical, a very good example of it is many artists have this type. That they have very deep personal sense of value. Okay, so we're going to start with the dominant functions here. Okay, let's keep this aside for now. Okay, so they have a very powerful sense of personal value, and that is really driving their creativity, and that is being guided by intuitions. Not really in case of INFP, it is guided by extroverted intuition of possibilities. So they are creating most fantastic kind of, they imagine all kinds of things based on that. And then comes the next function, NESI, and they actually implement it in physical things. And the thing that they're weakest at is the TE part. So this is like the artist kind of type. And if you want to look at the functions, corresponding functions over here, so this is Fi. There is a tremendous war that many times they have between emotions across people because they have such a personal sense of it that they tend to clash with others on that. There is the Ni, which is the Senex. So this is the opposing function. This Ni is going to be the Senex function, which is like a criticizing parents. So you're producing all this art about all these various things, but what is the meaning? What is the meaning? Criticizing of that using that function, right? And then there is the SE function here. So this is SE function over here, which is the trickster function, and this is the demon function, which is the TI, the logical thought, which actually interferes with what they are trying to feel and trying to intuit. So it's a very different, you can see that it's like a different complex, like different complex. It's like a different set, different ways in which these functions are operative in people. So this is just showing you the richness of the variety of how things are put together. And they're not necessarily very clean and simple like these. Individual people have actual lots of variations. Like many people have like maybe 4 functions which are strong, and the play, it can be much more complex than that. But you can think about this. I would recommend not thinking about this first. Trying to master just this, and not even that, just mastering first just the first 2 functions that you have. Trying to understand them. Okay, saying that this is what I'm doing, this is what my dominant function is, it's being guided by this. Just seeing that, understanding that, then slowly bringing in the next function, and then bringing in this function, and then much later going and adding these functions to that. Because you kind of have to say, okay, what does this mean to me? How do I apply it? And that would be the order in which I think it makes sense to apply it. So more questions.
So this is very exciting because if you can do this for individual, then you can do it for a culture.
Yes.
Whether it's the culture of a nation, culture of the period of time, like Egyptian culture, Greek culture, modern culture, or you can do it to the culture of an organization. And then you can say, all right, how are we uniting people in this culture? Like you can say, what is the dominant trait of this organization or this culture? And because what you just said, right, there's richness in the variety. So it just makes me think about, if we look at people as richness in their diversity, because they come with diverse backgrounds and thinking. And if we are working together because we are social animals, then how do we unite with commonalities that rather than point out differences?
Absolutely, great idea. So I want to bring up two things. So one thing is we talked about Namaste. I realized did not explain what it means. So Namaste in the Indian tradition means the God in me greets the God in you, and that's the way in which that is a traditional greeting in India. What it means is that I'm trying to connect to you from the core of my being. And moment you try to do that with another person, the entire equation changes, entire dynamic changes. The differences are suddenly seen in a very different light. It is like you have zoomed out and you're saying, oh, you're basically the same, or there is this deep commonality between you. And then the understanding of differences is dramatically different. And you're absolutely right, different cultures and different periods of time have different kind of dominant functions and weaker functions. Many functions, just like many cultures, just like many people, tend to be just hung up on their own uh, strengths and weaknesses, and they regard the other as being, oh, this is other. And one of the things about seeing the unity of this is to say that we're all human beings and there is a commonality between us, and it is well worth the effort of engaging, figuring out that this is about developing the vocabulary to be able to understand differences and to be able to figure out what is the yes and, using an improv term, that what is it that is common to the two people, that the person that you are encountering, and from that, how can we use the differences as building blocks, as tools for producing something greater. So 1 + 1 is not 2. It's certainly not 1 against 1. And 1 + 1 is not 2, but 1 + 1 is probably 4, because they correct for each other's weaknesses. They not correct for, but they fill each other's weaknesses, so the total whole is greater than the parts. So that's what I would say. Any questions, Rohit?
No, I think this is very, very interesting. Obviously, I have to go much deeper with the resources that you've given, but I was thinking that, you can use this framework to figure out how to not just convince, but approach other people, right? So, um, any idea or any reasonably complex thing you want to communicate will have these 4 aspects, of intuition, of emotion, of action. And if the person is an action-oriented person, you could start with the action-oriented concepts in that idea, thing, whatever the notion you want to communicate, and work with that. And that actually will, enable us to bring them on much faster, drop their resistance a little bit, because, we'll be talking more about the function that they are most comfortable with.
Absolutely. Yesterday we talked about Buckminster Fuller, the Buckminster Fuller
There you
project
go.
that we
Yes.
are launching.
Yes.
And we are doing this exactly in this way, that we have these 4 different kinds of meetups. We have meetups which focus on the community and the camaraderie of people by having, okay, so firstly I want to talk about the problem, or what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the entire community, we're inviting the entire community of people who've been studying Buckminster Fuller for a long period of time to come and talk to general public. That's what we're trying to do. So there is a big division. Most people in Buckminster Fuller community, they have the ideas, but they have to appeal to the emotions, appeal to the values of everybody else. And it has to be done in a concretized way, so people who are really focused on actions, they say this is really useful. And they have to feed the intuitions, the deepest intuitions. And we have to do all of this, both for the people who know the Buckminster Fuller work very, very well, and people who are just beginning to understand it. So how do you do that? And the plan that we have developed, with CJ and Joe and Maritza, and by the way, these meetups are going to be Sundays at 9 p.m. Eastern time, and you're very much invited. The idea that we are focusing on is Bucky inspired comprehensivity. So how can you make sure that all aspects of your life are operative, and how do you make the most of that? So that's what the meetups are about. So what we are doing, in the planning of the meetups, so we said the deepest insights are with Bucky. So we have to look at Bucky in original. We are studying a book by him called Critical Path once a week. So these are meetups each week. So we have 4 meetups, 4 weekly meetups. So one of the weeks we'll be studying Critical Path. So that goes week after week after week, once a month. Second, we are going to have discussions, deep discussions between people. So there is exchange, there is a camaraderie that develops of both amongst people in the Bucky communities who have not interacted that much with each other, as well as people who, between the experts in Bucky and everybody else, and between everybody else. So there's development of camaraderie. Next, we're going to have presentations of specific ideas of Bucky by these people. They've been studying it for decades, and they're going to be presenting that. And then lastly, we're going to have works of Bucky, like the geodesic dome, or implementations based on Bucky's ideas. We'll have people who have done that design work to come and present. And what happens is that this makes everybody's functions come alive in various things. Some things are going to speak to some people, some things are going to speak to some other people, and they're going to see the connections between these as well. So that's a great example of how you can use these to plan. Any more questions?
So I'm just thinking about how to understand people and use it in my organization, and looking forward to that. I think I'll have more questions about the introverted and extroverted functions of this, how to identify. I think finding the dominant ones are easier. How to find the shadow functions and work with those. I'm still trying to understand that.
Absolutely, it's a tough thing. It's a tough thing. And again, I would recommend the following resources to understand the functions themselves, or types. Michael Pierce has a fantastic set of videos. Please search for YouTube Michael Pierce, Pierce. That's one. I've put links to his website, to his channel in the links. Secondly, this model of Bucky of John Beebe is amazing. The best presentation of it that I have seen is the one that Richard Owens did with us, his student, where John Beebe was also present, who did Q&A afterwards. That's the best place to start with the 8-function model. I know that many people in the MBTI community are not familiar with the 8-function model, and I strongly recommend it because it brings in the depth psychology into MBTI. MBTI is usually focused on the top 2 functions, at most top 4 functions, but this brings in all the 8 functions in a very deep, integrated way. So I definitely recommend that. And if you want to know more about this, we've done another video yesterday on the basics of using this, so I would recommend those. All right, so with that, thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Recording stopped.